welcome to the Global Homeschool Summit. And today with me, I have Jodi Chaffee, and she is a seasoned podcaster, a homeschool mom, and a family culture expert. Her podcast, the Home and Family Culture Podcast, is an excellent opportunity for you to listen to dozens of experts that she's interviewed, from para-athletes to authors to entrepreneurs to seasoned homeschoolers. Her whole premise behind doing her podcast is sort of hacking cultures, successful cultures, and how you can apply it to your family to be more intentional, especially if you're interested in homeschooling. So thanks for being with me today, Jodi.
I'm so excited to be here, Stacey. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So the very first thing I want to talk about is your framework. So you have a family culture framework, and the beginning point in your framework is talking about compulsory education versus mastery education. So can you break that down for us?
Yeah. That's a big question. So this is my framework of education. You know, it's if we want to educate our children, give them an education, which first of all is different from schooling, right? So that's this idea of compulsory versus mastery, is that we aren't in this to just school our children. We want them to develop themselves, their character. You know, we want them to get passionate and excited and invested in their education and who they are. And so that's what mastery education is all about. It's not about standing over your children and saying, okay, you need to know X, Y, and Z of these academic subjects that have no practical application, but giving them opportunity so that they discover things that get them excited and get them passionate and help them to, basically they get to a place where they're geeking out about education, or is it subjects that they want to learn, that they are inspired by. And so that's the difference between compulsory versus mastery, is that you can't make kids learn. It's that old adage, right? Of you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink, or whatever. You know, that you can't physically open your child's mind and cram knowledge into it. They have to want it. And we spend so much of our energy trying to make our kids do stuff and learn stuff that becomes the focus instead of what they're supposed to be learning. And so it becomes like counterproductive, because when we're spending so much time focusing on the logistics of learning and schooling, and the logistics of keeping rules, and the logistics of checking off boxes and all those things, that we forget why we're doing it in the first place. And the reason why we want to do it in the first place is because we want our children to be self-reliant. We want them to be self-confident. We want them to be self-actualizing. We want them to, have personal values of what's really important and what's going to allow them to live a life that is fulfilling and inspiring and something that they chose. I think so much compulsory education, we forget who we are when we are forced to do certain things. And so we lose that capacity to listen and to intuitively figure out, okay, what do I want to do with my life? What do I need in order to grow and progress? What's going to help me to develop as a person? And so that voice, whatever it is, call it whatever you want, intuition, it just goes away. And then at some point your child grows up and says, okay, I don't have teachers and parents and counselors and whatever else out there that's supposed to be in their head talking, goes away, and they're left by themselves. Well, then that's where we have rampant depression and aimlessness and self-doubt and all the things that are the real pandemic, right, that we're facing in our culture, where we have a whole society of people who just, everything is relative, everything is, there's no values, there's no standards, there's no, and whatever makes me happy or whatever is going to distract me at the time to keep me happy and satisfied, but those things actually don't end up being satisfying because we need more and more of it. And then we're going to talk about that also after this, I think, because that's part of my framework. And so the compulsion side of things, we want to, it's like we want to escape from that. And so then it becomes, our kids want to do things opposite of what we, and so it just becomes this spiral out of control where we're constantly doing power struggles with our kids, and they just want to be free, and they want autonomy, and they want to geek out over things that they're excited about. And we're going, no, that doesn't fit with the standard. That doesn't fit with the syllabus, right, of what we're supposed to be learning. And it just spirals out of control, and then we all feel worthless. so that's just off the top of my head. I mean, I know I had these notes that I was like, oh yeah, I wanted to cover these things in the interview, but those are the things that when we talk about compulsory education, it's you're forcing your children to give up their autonomy, their freedom, their ability to hear their own voice, and that is the real pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. Like the idea of autonomy, I think, is really important when it comes to transitioning from the idea of being in school to actually homeschooling. So there's a lot of people who are having to deal with that right now. And we're talking to parents about it, where they want to make sure every moment of their day is filled. And, the two pieces that tend to come out of that conversation is, well, you need to give them a little bit of autonomy, and you need to provide them with time, because it's the time in between, right? So
Yep.
when we have an experience, it's the time after the experience, when we think back on it and we chew on it and we dream about it, that we really take in the information and the experience. You ask somebody directly after they come back from a holiday, how was it? And they usually can't tell you everything that they loved about the experience until a solid month later, until their brain has had an opportunity to sort of consume it. So compulsory education takes away time.
Yeah.
It takes away that opportunity, right, to shift, back and forth between that sort of concept. So what I liked about your framework, and what I kind of like to talk about now, is sort of on that idea of, I just want more and more and more in order to make myself feel better, or feel full, or feel whole, as changing from being a consumer to being a producer. And so how do you help families when they're trying to build a new family culture shift to that, even seasoned homeschoolers, I think, would be challenged by this concept. So how do we shift into that sort of mindset when it comes to building that culture around our homeschooling?
Well, the two concepts go hand in hand, I think, a lot with this compulsion and consumption, that it's always something where we're looking for somebody to give us something. We're always looking for somebody to fill us and give us direction and give us, and then consumption is, well, I need something to fill my time, or I need something to distract myself, or or something that's pleasant, something that's pleasing, and but we're never ever going to be satisfied by those things. The things that we consume, we're always going to need more food, first of all, which isn't a bad thing. But the things that we become addicted to, images, or games and screens, or sugar, all these kinds of things, they give us a jolt of some hormones, and then the next time we want to consume it, we have to get more of it in order to get that same jolt, drugs and those kinds of things. Or like, we get money, and then we go, wow, I need to go and buy and spend this money, and I can't ever buy enough stuff to fill this hole in my soul of the things that I want to get. So consuming is it just leads to a bigger and bigger appetite. And like, even coming back to food, we have this, oh, I want more of this food, and the next time I want even more of it, and then we become insatiable, like we just need to get more and more food, and that becomes a disordered behavior, right? We understand that too much consuming becomes disordered behavior, but at the same time, what's the antidote? Well, I want to be able to have those things. I want to be able to feel satisfied, even in this idea of bringing our children to a place of mastery education. We want them to geek out on that thing, and they're going to want to like consume everything about it, right? Well, it's a natural process of our development, if it's in moderation, or if we can direct it at things that lead to production. So that's the antidote, is when we get to a place where, okay, my child is really excited about video gaming, for example. How can I turn this around to be something that can actually be productive? Well, me as their mentor, as their guide or their coach, I can say, wow, I wonder how they make this video game. Or I wonder how this story came about of how they created it. Or I wonder about the computer. I don't know everything about the coding and all that kind of stuff, the words, the technical terms about video gaming, but I mean, it's something that's so prevalent and, in our culture, that kids want to play video games. Well, how can we turn this around into something that becomes productive? So while consuming leads us to, it dulls our senses, it leaves us craving more and desiring more, being productive actually leads us to feeling fulfillment and satisfaction. And it leads us to want to solve problems, because with consuming, I mean, there's no, you can't, okay, let me see how I can phrase this really well, because when you're talking about these cravings and you're talking about needing more and more, we can't ever get fulfillment from it. But when we go to production and we encounter problems, we encounter, like in our education, even you got a math problem, you got a problem where you want to create something because you geeked out about that video game. Well, then you have a problem to solve, and solving that problem becomes very satisfying and very fulfilling, as opposed to just consuming the game and having to keep buying more and more and more games. That satisfaction that comes from, oh, I can take apart this robotic thing, or I can take apart this machine, or I can take apart, dismantle and examine this thing in front of me that I'm excited about, then reassemble it or figure out how it goes together. That is really, it's so satisfying when you create something out of it. Or if you have a project, and you do something where you learn a handcraft or something like that. Creating that thing, it becomes so satisfying when you're finished. And I mean, yeah, you want to go and create some more, or you want to see, okay, what can I do with this thing that I've now created? It's very satisfying when you have been in that productive state of mind, where actually there's a lot that comes with it, with like, being in flow, or being able to have that almost meditative mindset where you're piecing things and solving things and putting them together. Having that creativity and that mental and physical exertion that goes into creating something, and it's just leads to that growth mindset. I would almost equate consumerism to like a fixed mindset, where it's like, I just want to be satisfied, but it's never going to be enough. Whereas producing is, oh, I have this problem in front of me, I'm going to look for a solution. Or it's okay if I look like I'm struggling, because I'm creating something, I'm problem solving, and I'm overcoming this thing. And so that's where I guess that, I'm sorry, I'm kind of geeking out, Stacey. I hope you don't mind about this myself,
okay.
Because, I love this idea of when my mind opened up to this idea of being a consumer versus being a producer. That is the difference between having a wealth mindset versus like a poverty mindset. If you were talking to, you want your children to become entrepreneurial, is when you hand somebody $1 million from winning the lottery, what's the first thing they do? They go out and spend it, and they even spend above their means. And then next thing you know, this person is going bankrupt, right? That's because they only have a consumer mindset. A wealth mindset is a producer mindset. They get $1 million and they say, what can I create out of this? How can I multiply this $1 million so that the next, you meet them in a year and they have $1 billion, because they were able to multiply that by using that as a resource and a tool to create something that was an investment. It comes back to them. If you've ever read anything by like Robert Kiyosaki, that's what he talks about, is that, the poor mindset is they spend on their liabilities and that's consuming, right? The wealthy, they spend on assets that gives them back, and then they spend on they buy liabilities with the return on the investment of those assets, you know, so they always have that continual rotation of income that eventually becomes passive.
Yeah, you
And
almost wonder if whether or not homeschooling starts to build more discerning consumers. So yes, we want them to
yeah,
produce, and they do that, right? But then, I can tell a consumer immediately because they're the complainers. You can
yeah,
see them in the school system because they're complaining about the grade they got, and complaining about their locker, or complaining about their schedule, or complaining about legitimate things like having to change classes so quickly and not being able to divide into anything. But they just seem to be in this state of constantly first world problems,
yeah,
complaining about not enough foam on their latte kind of thing. And they sort of get into this state of, instead of looking at things from a different perspective of how to solve problems, how to view the world as in how I have value to it. Whereas the producer, the production, the
yep,
concept that you're talking about is that when we can produce something, children have a very difficult time in society because they don't feel they contribute. So
mm-hmm,
when we can give them an opportunity to contribute, their their self-confidence begins to increase, because the difference between self-confidence and self-esteem is how I feel about myself, but self-confidence is my belief in my ability to do things. And
yeah,
I think that what I see a lot in your framework, and that you build out for homeschoolers, is in your homeschool, start building into the structure of what you're doing opportunities for them to see that they can do it. Start building that can do
yep,
attitude, so that they're, it's kind of like that lead from behind business focus where you really want a team to shine. But if you're micromanaging the heck out of them and telling them what they should be doing and how they should be learning it and what they should be focusing on, they don't spend any time in that sort of engineering process, that,
yep.
problem, think, solution kind of idea. So I can see that structure of your framework starting to shift people's perspectives to even how they homeschool. Never mind homeschooling versus not homeschooling. Just
Yeah.
just even like running your family life, like your structure internally. You talk about how to be able to do this, that there's, when I kind of dove deep into your framework, it's sort of this fear and trust cycle, like where we sit in there. And I'm an unschooler, so that's a huge leap of faith. Much like being an entrepreneur, I had to trust that I was going to be able to feed my family. That, my gosh, now I don't have health care. I have to come up with my own pension plan, and that's a leap of faith. And it's very similar to even just base homeschooling, I think. But unschooling, where I give them complete autonomy, it was, my husband and I joked all the time that, we don't know if we're going to wreck them or not. This
Right.
is like a giant social experiment on our children, and wondering if they're going to turn out okay. But I think that comes that fear trust cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you coach people in order to move them away from fear and into trust?
Well, all of these principles, when we talk about mastery, we talk about being a producer, and we talk about trust, all of those things have to do with empowering our children and ourselves to be free agents, that we have to be able to grow up with the mindset, I'm in charge of my life, right? And when I was thinking about how to answer this question, and I was thinking of some examples, that whenever I have felt like my parents put into my lap, you are in charge of your life, I felt so excited. This one time I was already a senior in high school, and at that point though, my parents, like, all I had to do was say what I was planning to do, and they said okay. As long as I let them know what my plans were, they completely let me go on my own, and everything was fine. Well, this one time I approached her and say, hey, some of my friends are going to do this thing. Is it okay if I go? And she looked at me and she was kind of puzzled and was like, well, it's your life. And I was like, oh, what? Like, I felt like my head exploded. I was like, oh my gosh. So number one, my mom totally trusts me. And number two, the outcome of whatever I do is on me. Like, if I fail, that's on me. If I succeed, that's on me. And it's a tendency for so many parents to want to be like, no, I have to make sure that my kids are succeeding. I have to make sure and protect them from things that could harm them, or these kinds of things, where the reality is those kinds of experiences are the ones that empower them to become free agents, to experience things on their own. And knowing that my parents trusted me, I always wanted to do the right thing because I valued their relationship. And they had taught me that, again, the outcome was on me. If I did stupid stuff, then I'm the one that had to deal with those consequences, you know? And so that was just knowing that they trusted me and that they empowered me to recognize those outcomes was, you know, it was just empowering. I can't think of a better word than empowering. But it's something that is, it goes both ways though. You got to be able to, parents need to trust their kids and kids need to be able to trust their parents. Another example that I thought of was, like our family recently moved in with my parents. And so we're doing this, you know, blended family thing. And so I have an explosive child and he tends to get upset whenever I'm like, no, you're not going to do this thing. Like, that's not something we're gonna do right now, whatever. Anyways, whenever he hears no, he gets really upset. And that first week we were here, my mom wanted, like, he exploded and my mom started ripping into him. I was like, no, step back. And I calmly responded to my son and I was like, okay, let's talk about this. And anyway, I spoke to my mom. I said, look, if I explode every time he explodes, then he's never going to trust me to respond as a parent and a mentor, as like somebody who loves him unconditionally. And so he knows he can trust me with his feelings, whatever they are, big or small, and all the things he's going through as a kid that he doesn't have the capacity to like manage right now, because of his undeveloped brain and all these kinds of things. And if I explode every time and I get triggered and I give into those triggers every time, our relationship is just going to completely deteriorate, you know? But it goes the other way around too. Like the other day, I handed my daughter some ingredients and like a very, very rough recipe. And I was like, here you go. Can you make dinner? We're having a rough time right now. And I would really love for you to make dinner. She's 11. And she's like, I've never made this before. And I was like, it's a really easy recipe. I know you can do it. And she's okay. And then half an hour later, we were all sitting down to dinner and she was like, I made dinner, you guys. And she was so excited, you know? And so it's like, when we trust our kids with these things that within within the context of our home where it's safe and they can experience this stuff, then they're going to feel that sense of free agency. Oh my goodness, my parents trust me to do hard things, or I faced this really hard thing and I was able to conquer it, be a producer, problem solve, you know, that it empowers them to self-actualize and to be able to grow and figure out how to then face more bigger problems going forward. If we constantly shelter our kids from ever experiencing anything, they're not going to have that self-efficacy to face bigger and bigger problems as they get older. So we have to enable them to do those hard things. And it comes back to,
right? Like a relationship issue. So there's so many people who are stuck in this situation right now. And one of the key takeaways I hope that anybody takes is that your relationship with your children is far more important than whether or not they finish the math worksheet, right? So that's kind of what I'm hearing, and what you're saying is relationship is sort of foundational.
Yeah. And to, and trust them when they, a lot of times there's a lot of power struggle conflicts, like for example, the dinner table. And it's like, well, they're just not hungry for what I prepared, or they're not hungry at all, or they want a variety. I try to give my kids a variety on the table and say, this is what's available, choose. And if they don't want it, okay, sorry. I trust that you're not hungry, or that you're listening to your body. Or, if I sit there and say, no, you must eat so much of these things, then that becomes a power struggle. And then that becomes the focus and the distraction, and they stop listening to their body. So, that's just one example. And it all comes back to, like you said, how do we respond in these situations when we are triggered? My mom told me that there are kids starving in China. I've got to finish my plate. So that's, again, that's a cultural narrative that people have perpetuated, that it's like, okay, but what's the reality here? Your children need to learn how to listen to their bodies. They need to learn that they can trust you, not to have a power struggle, or that dinner time is a time and place of contention and fighting. That's just one example. Again, with the math idea, if we bring math to the table and we're trying to sit down and do it, and your child is freaking out, they're panicking and they're going, I don't know how to do this. Stop and look them in the eyes and go, are you hungry?
Would you like a cup of tea?
Is there, maybe that's really the issue here. Our kids, we need to meet them where they are and to show them that they are the priority, not the agenda that we have, because a lot of times that is where the trust deteriorates, because we place judgment over our children of whether or not they are meeting our agenda of what X, Y, and Z is supposed to look like, what they're supposed to be doing. And that judgment is what comes through instead of the love and connection that we want to make with them. And so if, you're sitting down really struggling and you see that your child is either avoiding the math or they're actually doing really as much as they can and they're just stuck, instead of going, well, work harder, or, oh, you're supposed to have this done by this time or whatever, that's when you got to sit there and meet them where they are and go, sounds like we need to try something else, or maybe let's take a break from this for a little while, or, whatever it is, you just be present and be process oriented rather than results oriented, being in your agenda. Because when we are stuck in our agenda and the expectations that we have, then we don't see our kids anymore. We only see that agenda. And so it goes with, again, with that relationship, having the open communication, so I talk about levels of family values, right? Like you have certain family values that you expect from your children, to keep rules or things like that. But say your child breaks a rule and they want to come to you and confess and be honest with you. First of all, you're probably still going to make sure that there's a consequence, but there's a hierarchy of values, because if the rule is the top priority and you reprimand that child and it becomes like, no, you broke the rule and I estranged you as my child, or, then you're deteriorating trust, right? But the relationship with your child needs to be the very top value. That, okay, they came to me and they wanted to be honest. They wanted to be open about something. They wanted to confess something to me that they were feeling ashamed. The antidote to shame is connection. And if we immediately meet that shame and that vulnerability with judgment and with more shame, then the trust is going to deteriorate, and therefore the relationship is going to deteriorate. And next time you want to sit down and teach them math, they're going to be like, forget you, Mom. I don't care what you say. So I talk about trust as the fuel in this vehicle of our family. Like, we're on a journey together. And if you don't have trust, you don't have fuel, you're not going anywhere. So the response to those, when we have the top priority, the top value needs to be our relationships, non-judgment, meeting our children from where they are, not from our personal triggers and our personal, baggage and things, but to be in the process with them and, let go of the agenda, be present with them. Don't be reactive. We want to be responsible, right? We want to respond to situations with that empathy and coaching. That's the thing. Like, parents, we're not, we are just stewards of our children. They were not given to us, they're given through us, right? That's something I've heard said, that it's like they are going to have their own lives, and our job is to coach them and mentor them and plant seeds and help them to cultivate these things. Well, but we can't give them those skills. We have to just mentor them and guide them and coach them and separate our baggage and stories from what they're experiencing, and meet their problems, their questions with empathy and with a growth mindset again, and instead of more shame, right? We want to be able to help them to grow.
Yeah, I think that's you kind of wrapped it all up sort of perfectly for me, is at the end of that prioritizing values and the idea that we only have them for a short period of time. I mean, the grand scheme of a human's life, the amount of time that human being spends with us in direction, I like the seeds idea, but that the most important thing that you have with your child is trust, is that idea, that relationship of trust. So I think that's actually a perfect note to end on. That is like awesome. Thank you so much, Jodi. That was excellent. If anybody wants to check out her podcast, the Home and Family Culture Podcast, I highly recommend it. I love it. I love listening to it, as well as she's available to talk to you about her framework, which I believe will be available as part of the Summit page. Thanks very much, Jodi, for coming, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and good luck in your homeschooling.